So I've noticed a stark new trend on Twitter over the past couple of days, mostly from some hardcore Labour supporters, but actually mostly from Liberal Democrat supporters. The idea that the polls are all rigged in favour of the Tories except the ones that say what I want them to say. So hang on a minute. Let's actually look at who's standing and look at what the issue is. The issue is this election, Brexit. As much as people don't want it to be, especially on the Labour side, the issue that most will be thinking about during this general election will be Brexit. At least that's the one that will be first or second priority in their head, will be Brexit. Unfortunately, the Labour position is not particularly appealing to most people because it's too fence-sitter-ish, and Labour's insistence, or at least Jeremy Corbyn's insistence, on him remaining neutral in the campaign, as I have outlined, I think I've mentioned this in a previous video, doesn't really sit well on an emotional issue like Brexit. But then you also have the sort of two opposite extremes. You've got the Brexit Party, who are so hardcore on Brexit that they will only accept a clean break WTO Brexit and nothing else. And you've got the Lib Dems, who are all about revoking Article 50 at almost any cost. I think the only party that has a sort of... The only two parties, in my view, that have a sort of intellectually honest approach to Brexit are the Green Party, who are pro-second referendum and intend to campaign to remain, which is, okay, fair enough. Not my preferred outcome, but that's at least an intellectually honest position. And then you've got the Conservatives, who want a Brexit, preferably with a deal, no second referendum on the table, all done and all sorted, as far as they're concerned. Also, let's not forget who is campaigning. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, who, yes, is a very good campaigner. He's a very good speaker when he's on the campaign stump. The issue that Jeremy Corbyn has this time as opposed to 2017 is he's a known quantity. 2017, for most people who vote in general elections, who are not permanently politically plugged in like a lot of us are who are watching this video, he was not really a known quantity. Jeremy Corbyn now has the distinct honour, I suppose you could call it, of being the most recognisable politician since Margaret Thatcher. People know who Jeremy Corbyn is now. People know what he's about. He's not new to anyone. The issue you've got is that although Jeremy Corbyn's policy is probably quite popular, he isn't. And leadership does matter. I know we don't live in a presidential system, but leadership is very important. Boris Johnson, on the other hand, yes, he's extremely unpopular with a certain section of society. I am not a fan of Boris Johnson. I do not think he is a good leader. I have many, many issues with him, especially when it comes to trust, as I think most do. But the issue you've got to remember here with Boris Johnson is he has a pretty good political record as far as democratic victories are concerned. He's never lost an election he's competed in. This constant comparison between Johnson and Farage irritates me, because Farage has only ever won in European elections where he's virtually guaranteed to win because of where he's standing. He always stands in the southeast, and because of who he's standing for. Nigel Farage has stood, I believe, is it 8 times for domestic office and has failed every time. Boris Johnson hasn't lost an election he stood in. So we are dealing with very, very different people. Boris Johnson is an extremely good campaigner. You might not like his campaign tactics. You might think it's really irritating. You might think it's really brash. The thing is, people talk about it. It's in people's heads. And unfortunately, we now live in an age where if something triggers your opposition, if something really irritates them, it's automatically a win. If Boris says something that really annoys Labour supporters, if Boris says something that really annoys Lib Dems, he's won. Because Conservatives love it. It's vice versa. If Corbyn says something that really winds up Conservatives, if a Labour activist says something that really gets under a Conservative's skin, they've won. Regardless of whether they've actually made a good point or not, regardless of whether they've said something that's accurate or not, they've won. Because that's the nature of our debate these days. It's really sad. But there you go. So here's why I don't think the polls are wrong. Because people are not factoring in the two biggest factors in the campaign. The known quantity of Jeremy Corbyn versus Boris Johnson, who hasn't lost an election he's participated in, and the issue of Brexit. I think the polls are probably right. The other issue I've noticed over the past couple of days, as a side issue, I suppose, is people's insistence that the other side can never possibly be right. I've seen two tweets, both from someone called Dave, actually. Two different people called David, obviously. But one said, I'm not seeing all these Corbyn activists outside the school gates like everyone says. I'm seeing lots of stuff on TV, but I see no Corbyn excitement. Where's it all coming from? It's all manufactured and nonsense. And then I saw an almost identical tweet in reverse. I'm not seeing this enthusiasm for Boris Johnson. I'm not seeing this enthusiasm for Brexit where I am. It's all fabricated and it's all in the press and it's all rubbish. Almost 12 hours later I saw that tweet. Are we now at such a point where people live in tiny, tiny bubbles? People don't look outside their own circle anymore? Or is it just that certain areas are so divided that people just don't interact with others, not through any choice, but just on a basis of geography? People don't interact with others that disagree with them anymore. Like, I've got to be honest, in Derby, I've noticed quite a lot of support for Boris Johnson from mostly white working class voters, a lot of ex-Labour voters actually. I've noticed an awful lot of support for Corbyn. Interestingly, not support for local candidates. It's all been support for Corbyn specifically. Mostly from voters of an ethnic minority background. But some middle class white voters. And I've seen an awful lot of people, my partner included in this, who have basically turned around to me and said, I'm going to spoil the ballot. It's all bollocks. I don't like any of them. I've not come across any Lib Dem supporters, actually. That is one thing. I've never, at least in Derby, come across any Lib Dem fans. I do know one Green Party supporter. But I've never come across a Lib Dem supporter in Derby. So, yeah, there's that. But, yeah. It's all very interesting at the moment. And I think people need to be looking in different places for feedback. Because people are in their own feedback loop, I think. And this election is going to be very interesting when it's over. To see how people react, especially on the Labour side, if the Conservatives don't get their way. And actually, if Labour pulls off a stunner, which they could do, it's not impossible. If Labour pulls off a stunner and pulls his back and gets into government, what the hell is the Conservative reaction going to be? It's gonna be something special to watch on Twitter, I'll tell you that much. Oh, goodness gracious. So yeah. This election, I think, will become more interesting when it's finished.